this morning, the quarterly grain stocks report, and the bigger report was the prospective plantings report. Not a lot to talk about in the grain stocks. Pretty much came in as expected.
It did. And it was kind of disappointing, actually, because we were expecting, or most of the trade was expecting USDA to come in and come in with a lower stocks estimate for corn because exports have been a little bit better than anticipated. Grind it for ethanol has been a little bit better. Feed demand has been a little bit better. So overall, I think the trade was a little disappointed that USDA didn't come in and make those adjustments. But I think they kind of pushed it down the road because of the tariffs and not knowing how they're going to perform for the rest of this year. So I think USDA kind of passed the buck and just kind of left the numbers fairly close to what were close to the expectations.
Moving on to the bigger report. This is, of course, one we've been waiting for, I think, all month for this one to come out. Any surprises for the big crops?
There were a couple surprises. One, the first line you've got there, principal acres. Again, we're seeing another decrease this year, and we can't explain why we're seeing less principal acres than the previous year. Last year we lost, I think it was close to 8 million. Now this year, again, we're losing to like 1.2. So that's kind of concerning and wondering where those acres are disappearing to. The other part was that corn acres were a little bit above expectations, by almost 1,965,000 from expectations. Soybeans were lower than expected. You would have thought that would have been a little more bearish to the corn, a little bit friendlier to the soybeans, but those two markets traded opposite. Of what the report said. And then wheat acres coming in 1 million less than what was expected. We saw a big drop in winter wheat acres as well as a drop in spring wheat acres.
So these are charts from USDA's executive summary. There's a lot of good information on these. Let's just go. Like you said, we had a drop in principal crop acres. But the one I wanted to get to is this is the number of acres compared to the last year and the percent of change. Red is lower than last year, blue is higher, and that's a very odd line down the middle of the country.
It is. It's amazing how, what would be considered the western part of the U.S. is all seeing below or lower principal acres, and everybody the other direction most are seeing an increase. So that definite line is a little bit concerning, and the fact that we're seeing another decrease is somewhat of a question of why.
Moving on to corn. Of the big states, everyone's going to plant more corn acres this year.
Yeah, everybody's planting more corn. And I think it was in the report, it was 40 out of the 48 states, continental states that are raising corn are seeing steady to an increase. So just about everybody's looking at having more corn. I think North Dakota, South Dakota, record amount of corn acres this year, if realized. So we are seeing on average a 5% increase on most of the states.
And again, there's the total U.S. corn acres per year. And again, here's the map. And again, this is a percent change from last year. Blue means we're planting more corn acres. And like you said, it's just about everybody.
Yeah, the few that aren't too far off of seeing acres increase, but they're just seeing a small decrease, except for, some of them in the east, which are seeing a pretty good drop. But overall, yeah, the economics said to plant more corn, and it looks like farmers responded.
Moving on to soybeans. Again, all the big states there are less soybeans this year. And like you said, no one's really surprised by that.
Maybe, right. Everybody was expecting to see lower soybean acreage. Right now, I think we're looking at 23 out of the 29 states are showing steady to a decrease. And just about everybody who's increasing corn, they're seeing the same reduction in soybeans. So it's almost an equal percentage.
And again, there's our soybean acres for the last 10 years. And there's the map. A lot different from corn. Pretty much everybody lower this year.
Pretty much everybody. What's interesting, though, Ohio is seeing a decrease in corn acres and an increase in soybean acres. So, that's the only major corn belt state that is seeing the opposite of what everybody else is doing.
And then if you throw corn and soybean acreage together, North Dakota still down from last year, which is a little surprising, I think.
It's a little surprising, especially since we're looking at record corn acres, but it just means that, how big soybeans have been, and we're just seeing a bigger decrease in the soybean acreage for North Dakota. I think we're looking at acres dropping somewhere in the area for the state down 6%. So it's a pretty big drop.
Just to touch on winter wheat for a second, this is where the winter wheat acres came in. Like you said, bigger than expected drop in those.
And especially since January in the report, we showed a 723,000 increase in winter wheat acres. This is actually showing a 75,000 acre decrease in winter wheat acres compared to last year. So that tells us that we saw some acreage got tore up or abandoned, grazed out by cattle, whatever, however, but it's not being counted as planted at this point.
Looking at spring wheat. Of course, North Dakota is the big spring wheat state, and we're going to have lower acres of that also.
Almost 6% decrease. So, and it's expected when you look at how wheat has performed, not only on the board, but also with last year's production. Not a surprise to see guys walking away from spring wheat. And
again, that's quite the downward trend we've had since 2018 on the spring wheat side.
The only time we saw acres increase was for 23, and then it's been steadily dropping since then. In those 2 years now, we've dropped over another 1 million acres out of the spring wheat, other spring wheat category.
And then again, looking at that same map we've been looking at, Minnesota is expecting to see a little bit more acres, North Dakota lower.
And South Dakota coming in unchanged. But but the big states, which are, primarily North Dakota and Montana, are seeing the drops, and that's really going to dictate the spring wheat market.
Durum, on the other hand, North Dakota is going to plant more durum, even though nationwide we're going to be down a little bit.
And I think some of that could be because of the potential tariffs coming in against Canada, or the talk of it. I think that's helped to increase the durum acres a little bit. And also the crop insurance price was higher than spring wheat, and I think that brought a few more durum acres into the rotations.
And again, same. Oh, I missed a slide. There again there's the durum acres, which have been going the opposite direction of spring. We've been seeing those increase, and then by state, North Dakota is the outlier there with their higher acres. And then looking at some of the minor crops, anything stick out to you on these numbers?
I was surprised to see oat acres drop, especially, again, we're talking about tariffs possibly against Canada. So we're not looking at the importation of oats coming from there, or barley, but we're seeing both those acres down as far as the U.S. is concerned. Actually oats, it looks like that's going to be the lowest acres on record planted to oats. I think we're record low in barley as well. So both of those kind of stick out as the specialty crops. Canola acres, not surprised, talking to producers over the winter about disease concerns. So they were looking at a little bit of a pullback in the canola acreage, and also the biofuels industry, I think, kind of added to that. Surprised at as big of an increase in sunflowers. It looks like we're going to gain back half of what we lost last year for acreage. So that was somewhat surprising.
And then again, these are from the executive summary showing you the percent changes from last year. We talked about too that we're down principal acres overall in the U.S., and most of these crops here, we are seeing drops in acres.
A lot of the specialties we're seeing, even showed there, like dry edible beans. Again, that's, I think, tariff related, as most of our edibles get exported or go through the USAID program. So we are seeing, I think, a little bit of a pushback on acreage because of some of those decisions that are being made.
And we were talking earlier this morning too, we don't talk about hay, but that is the third largest crop grown in the U.S. behind corn and soybeans.
Which is amazing to think about that. But hay acres are quite prevalent in just about every state. It, of course, has hay that they grow. It looks like, when you look at this year, North Dakota is going to be at a record low for acreage. That's kind of surprising. But when you look at where the crops are at, a lot of guys were tearing up and looking at, turning their land more into production agriculture instead of hay.
The last few crops here. Sugar beets are seeing a little bump this year. So
which, sugar demand, I mean, the prices are good. So they're looking at seeing a little bit more of an increase in their acreage. They have that allotment so that they can make those adjustments pretty quick. So that's kind of interesting to see that happen. But again, like you said, the sunflower market's kind of a surprise as we're getting back half of what we lost last year.
And then kind of just to wrap this up, this is what FSA or USDA considers the principal crops. And like we said, corn, soybeans, hay, and then wheat really just leading all the crops. And
it's an impressive chart to look at. You don't think of it as the acres being that, the corn and soybeans and hay and winter wheat are that commanding of acres versus the rest of the markets that are growing out there.
And then if we look at the percent change from last year, sunflowers are beating out the corn increase in acres. Since we're having such a 46% increase this year.
Kind of a telltale chart as well to see where we're seeing the decreases.
And then this is showing the number of acres change from last year. And of course, corn is overwhelming that on the plus side and soybeans on the negative side. And cotton was the second biggest drop in acres there too. And we don't talk about that very often, but we do watch those.
We do watch those. Yeah. Cotton is, especially, more in the southern regions, but I mean, it is also one where, sorghum and corn are the competing acres there. And right now you can see that both sorghum and corn are the acres that are taking the acres away from cotton. Cotton's a very export dependent market. We have to export 80% of what we produce. And that's likely why we're seeing the pullback as well.
And that is all we have. Do you have any last thoughts, Randy, on this?
Well, the market didn't seem to really react much to the acreage or the stocks or the acreage estimate. So that was, we saw soybeans slip a little bit on Monday after the numbers were out. Corn went up a little bit. I think they're thinking that the numbers are pretty much worked into what we've been seeing as far as the market trade here over the last couple of days. Now we'll start watching weather. That's going to be the big thing moving forward. It does tell us that, with soybean acres dropping a little bit more, weather is going to play a more important factor for soybeans through the growing season, because we need to, try to get as much production as we can because of the drop in acres. So that, I think, is going to keep it interesting.
There's our contact info. You know how to get a hold of us, and thank you for watching.